Hey, Envy Pals, Tanner. If you've been invested in politics lately or on the leftist sphere, you've probably heard the phrase manufacturing consent thrown around. And there's a reason, but today let us talk about what manufacturing consent is. Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of the Mass Media is a 1988 book by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky. It argues that the mass communication media of the U.S. are effective and powerful ideological institutions that carry out a system-supportive propaganda function by reliance on market forces, internalized assumptions, and self-censorship, and without overt coercion, by the means of the propaganda model of communication. The title refers to the consent of the governed and derives from the phrase, the manufacture of consent. Alright, so you have these big brain lefties like Noam Chomsky and Edward S. Herman writing about something, but what is it? The book introduced the propaganda model of communication, which is still developing today. The propaganda model for the manufacture of public consent describes 5 editorially distorting filters which are applied to the mass reporting. My throat's killing me today. Reporting of news in mass communications media. These 5 filters of editorial bias are size, ownership, and profit orientation. The dominant mass media outlets are large profit-based corporations, and therefore they must cater to the financial interests of the owners, such as corporations and controlling investors. We see this with companies like Fox and World News Corporation. The size of the media company is a consequence of the investment capital required for the mass communications technology required to reach a mass audience of viewers, listeners, and readers. The advertising license to do business. Since the majority of revenue of major media outlets arise from advertising, advertisers have acquired a de facto licensing authority. Media outlets are not commercially viable without the support of advertisers. News media must therefore cater to the political prejudices and economic desires of their advertisers. This has weakened the working class press, for example. And it also helps explain the attrition in the number of newspapers. You only have like 5 main ones. Sourcing mass media news. Herman and Chomsky argue that the large bureaucracies of the powerful subsidize the mass media and gain special access to the news by their contribution to reducing the media's cost of acquiring and producing news. The large entities that provide this subsidy becomes routine news sources and have privileged access to the gates. That is, not across. I'm dumb. I wrote this myself and I fuck up. Non-routine sources must struggle for access and may be ignored by the arbitrary decision of the gatekeepers. Editorial distortion is aggravated by the news media's dependence upon private and governmental news sources. If a given newspaper, television source, magazine, etc. incurs disfavor from the sources, it is subtly excluded from access to information. Consequently, it loses readers and viewers, and ultimately, advertisers. To minimize such financial danger, news media businesses editorially distort their reporting to favor government and corporate policies in order to stay in business. 4. Flack and the enforcers. Flack refers to negative responses to a media statement or program. For example, letters, complaints, lawsuits, or legislative action. Flack can be expensive to the media, either due to loss of advertising revenue or due to the costs of legal defense of the media's outlet's public image. flat can be organized by powerful private groups, think tanks like the Heritage Foundation or PragerU or the NRA even. Prospects of eliciting flack can be a deterrent to the reporting of certain kinds of facts and opinions. Anti-communism / the War on Terror. Anti-communism was included as a filter in the original. But Chomsky argues that since the Cold War's ended, anti-communism was replaced by the War on Terror as the social mechanism that keeps people in fear, because there's always the bad guys, and we have to ramp up our military because of the bad guys, and don't ever question why they're the bad guys. So why is this book not talked about every day, and why is it not taught in high schools? I mean, most intellectuals acknowledge this as a correct assessment of how the media works. Well, this is where I come in with some opinions. I personally think that if people were taught how the media pushes its agendas through the propaganda model, then the people would probably try and restrict that media, as some countries have done. Regardless, if you want a book to read that covers how the media works from people who know language and know how this stuff works, then this is the book for you. And how is this relevant in our current situation? Media controls our lives, every bit of them. And the media we consume can often give us an indication on our values as a person. Companies can, if they want, dial the messaging of the media one way or another, and none are the wiser. This happens a lot in news wartime coverage. The media acts in a way to preserve the global network of capital, and lying to the masses, it's one way that this is done, unfortunately, through the propaganda model. So yeah, that's depressing. But is there any good sides? Well, yes, actually. Since we live in the plastic age, we have essentially what is a buffet of media to consume, and this can be both good and bad. You can cater your entire personality to the media you consume, and use that media to make the change that you want for the world. However, this is also bad because it continues the consumption and capitalism, which is just the worst forms of greed and gluttony. One solution that some have proposed is that we have to stop consuming as much and not let the media control our lives, which is way easier said than done, especially during COVID times. I'm Tanner, and that was a brief summary of manufacturing consent. I hope you enjoy the content that I have been pushing out lately. Have a good one.